A lot of times our governments, both federal government and subnational government, do not pay attention to these small communities. I mean, you go to some communities and they don't have a primary school, they don't have a secondary school buildings, and their children need to trek miles to other communities before they can get basic education. I think every community should have at least a primary school, a secondary school, but till today, some communities in some states do not, have such. And a lot of times, because it's risky for their children to go miles before they can get this basic education, then they decide that, they rather not go to school.
You're welcome to Economy and Politics Conversation. I'm Ottoabasi Abasiekong. This edition will be looking at subnationals' investments in human capital and sustainable growth. My guest joining me virtually is Adejoke Akinbode. She's the head of research, BudgIT, a civic and policy advocacy group. She joins me virtually for this conversation. It's great to have you, Adejoke, for this conversation.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. As you know, federal government is always talked about, but states are very critical to driving development across the country. Recently, the World Bank, in its April 2026 Nigeria Development Update, citing current geopolitical shocks, called on the federal government to adopt fiscal discipline and targeted social protection measures for vulnerable citizens. From a budget perspective, how critical are subnationals in achieving citizen social protection and subnational fiscal discipline?
Okay, thank you for that question. If we are looking at social protection and also fiscal discipline, I think it goes way beyond the federal government, right? And as we all know that the subnationals or the state governments are more closer to the citizens at the grassroots level, right? So they are actually way more important when it comes to being disciplined fiscally and also social protection. I mean, the first thing I will speak about is on social protection, right? The states, they basically serve as the primary interface between policy and people. And when I say policy, those are policies, majority of the policies are being put in place by the federal governments. But for implementation of these policies to actually take place, it has to, pass through the states level in most cases, right? So while the federal government, frameworks may define the broad frameworks, the broad programs and the likes for these policies to be implemented. Policies like, let's say, insurance scheme, national insurance schemes, for example, when it comes to our health sector, right? Implementation depends on the capacity at the state level. So how well are these states, how do they, how much capacity do they have to actually implement these policies, right? So, and also beyond capacity, we also have the political will. So even if the federal government is putting out these policies, excellent policies, we have a lot of them in the country. The states, individual states, do they have the political will to actually implement these policies? And this boils down to different political parties that we have. In a situation where the political party at the federal level is different from the political party, let's say, for example, in Osun State, right? So implementing these policies might be very dicey because, after all, the people putting these policies in place, we are not, our mandates do not really tally, right, due to political differences. And another thing is also looking at regional perspectives of states. What works in Lagos State might not work in a state like, let's say, Bayelsa State, right? So they need to also look at, for example, poverty distribution in different states. How do we want to implement a policy that actually speaks to poverty alleviation programs in Lagos State? How do we implement such policy in Zamfara State? So the way and level of implementation will definitely be different because the dynamics of each state are actually very different. By the end of the day, I think everything boils down to coordination. It boils down to transparency. It also boils down to if they can also put in place a form of performance benchmarking across states, right? So the kind of performance benchmarking they will put in each state will definitely be different, or they can do it like a regional benchmarking exercise, right? So that what's your expectation in Osun State will be different from your expectation in Zamfara states, definitely, even if they are implementing the same policy, right? Also, if you want to look at fiscal discipline as well, it's actually also tallies with social protection, because a lot of these states actually remain heavily reliant on federal transfers. And I mean, in the last 2 years, we saw a spike in FAC allocation to the states. So it's actually very difficult for states, except few states like, let's say, Lagos State, let's say Rivers State, or maybe Anambra State, that can actually, produce idea that can almost tally with their FAC allocation, right? So yes, despite that, they actually still remain, heavily reliant on federal transfers. Without prudent budgeting, without transparent reporting systems, without efficient public financial management, at the subnational level, these federal transfers that they're getting will not actually reflect on their citizens. And that is where fiscal discipline comes in place. They need to ensure that whatever programs they are actually implementing, they're actually disciplined, they're following, this is what is budgeted, this is how much we've disbursed. And they need to put in place a functioning MIE, monitoring and evaluation, to ensure that monies being allocated or monies being disbursed are actually being expended as it should be. Right, not a lot of times you see that a lot of funds are being diverted to other things, right? And also, I think one major thing that actually correlates to almost all states is weak procurement processes at the subnational levels. I think almost all states actually have this their procurement process is very, very weak, extremely weak. And this at the end of the day erode fiscal credibility, and it reduces the effectiveness of public spending at the end of it. So fiscal discipline is very important because even if the federal government is extremely prudent and disciplined when it comes to spending, if the subnationals are not, disciplined, then the citizens are not going to feel the impacts of governance on them. I feel like citizens actually need more. They should have more expectations from the subnationals than the federal governments.
Thank you. And that's what over the years BudgIT has been doing, bringing the analysis. I mean, looking at your State of States 2025, you highlighted states that are viable, states like Lagos that you mentioned, Ogun State, Lagos, Abia, Anambra, Ogun State, amongst others, and even Delta. So we need to see, like you rightly said, the procurement process. That is even one that really caught my attention. It's very important for contracts and projects, but the fiscal discipline is very critical at this time. And this is what subnational governments must take seriously, because we must move beyond federal to subnational development. Now, still looking at what the World Bank highlighted in its April 2026 edition of the Nigeria Development Update, investing in education and health skills development will lead to a high-income population and economic transformation. Now, look at your annual State of State assessments, and let's look at the year 2025 edition. How are subnationals prioritizing education and healthcare? What gaps need to be addressed?
I think in recent years, right, we've seen a form of some improvements when it comes to allocation to these key sectors. I mean, you've mentioned health, you've mentioned education, right? We've seen some improvements both at the federal government level and even then at the subnationals, right? But allocation is different from disbursement, is different from actuals, rather. So, right. So, it's one thing to allocate 100 million for a project, and it's another thing for them to say at the end of the year they only disbursed 20 million. I mean, they've never even disbursed up to a quarter. So most times you see that, yes, they try to increase their allocation to these key sectors. Even infrastructure, you see its allocation, increasing over the years. But at the end of when you look at their budget implementation reports at the end of each quarter, or less at the end of the fiscal year, then you realize that a little has actually been disbursed, and the implementation was it becomes very little because they did not actually disburse the full funds that was allocated. So there is actually basically there's always a gap, a huge gap between allocation and actual spending, and it also just tells us that states prioritization is, often more rhetorical than real. So, of course, on paper, yes, they're prioritizing these our key sectors, but in terms of performance, in terms of actuals, their priorities in another thing entirely. Because we realize that some sectors they try to disburse a lot of funds from the allocation to some sectors, while some sectors they barely disburse anything. I mean, we recently, in I think a month or a couple of weeks ago, the minister of health, federal minister of health, said only about 30 something million rather was raised out of the
Capital
over 200.
for healthcare ministry.
Then you wonder, is more or less they've not released anything for implementation of capex for the year 2025 in a sector like health. So then when you say our health sector is in shambles, you're not going to be wrong. So you realize that yes, on paper they try to allocate funds, but when it comes to disbursement is something else. Then another thing again, when it comes to these key sectors, is that beyond the huge allocation and even let's assume that there's huge disbursements, you need to break it down to per capita. So in Lagos State, for example, how much is health spending per capita? So me as a person that live in Lagos State, how much did they spend on me, right? So you realize that it's extremely low when you break it down to per capita. And I mean, no states, I don't think for last year, I don't think any states actually exceeded 20,000 naira per capita when it comes to education. And I think for health, I'm not sure they exceeded around 10,000 naira, which is extremely low.
Across the 36 states? No states.
Yes, which is extremely low. So it actually just shows us that despite there is, I mean, when it comes to expenditure in total, there is increased aggregate increment in expenditure. But when you scale it down to the citizens level, to the grassroots level, it barely touches each citizen. If you compare it to our debt, to the state's debt burden, if you break debt burden of each state down per capita, then you realize that me as a person, how much am I owing? I'm owing huge amount of money, but the state is barely spending on me. And I think another constraint to this our subnational spending is that even though if there is increment in capital spending, you realize that they tend to prioritize some sectors more than some sectors, right? Even sectors that you feel like, I don't think there's any sector that does not benefit citizens, right? But it's just that there are some sectors that ideally should be really, really prioritized. For example, I mean, health, education, infrastructure, security. But you realize that they just try to. Then even when it comes to infrastructure, for example, we have power, we have works, we have housing. But you realize that they implement some projects that I would say it is a want of the citizens, not a need of the citizen. And that is because most states do not carry out what we call needs assessments. So they just sit down, just draft the budget, input projects that they feel they should implement in a fiscal year without consulting citizens and say, what do you actually need? What should we prioritize? Right. So at the end of the day, they implement projects, but it turns to projects that people do not directly benefit from on the immediate benefits, do not give immediate benefits to citizens. So it's not like they are not implementing projects, but it's just that a lot of times is their priority is not citizens' priority or citizens' expectation. So these are actually gaps that needs to be addressed, and it's something that is a mistake that's occurred over the years, and it needs to be addressed, basically.
So what role do you see regional development commissions play in deepening human capital investments in the country? We are hearing talks of a national plan, but where does the region come in?
Okay, so when it comes to these regional development commissions, I think they're actually very important. And if they actually take their role seriously, especially when it comes to human capital development, right? For example, I think they can actually serve like as a hub to align federal priorities and state level implementation and then local needs. So they look at, okay, so what is the federal government trying to prioritize in the entire country? And so each region will now look at, oh, so how does this priorities, these federal priorities, how does it actually, how can we bring it down to our state level and, implement it? And before implementation, look at the local needs of the people. Like I said, they need to start carrying out needs assessments. What do citizens actually need? In this community, is it pipe-borne water they need, or is it primary school that they need, right? Then they now, try to align these three together. And that is how they can actually, show that they are actually playing their role efficiently or effectively. One of the things that they can look at is also accountability. And before they can look at accountability, they need to ensure that they actually, there is data, right? Because I think another thing is that many states in Nigeria struggle with is their weak data systems. So they do not actually have data collection system. So I think these regional development commissions can actually bridge that gap for them, look at how they can actually ensure that the data systems in the states are actually, up to par, and they make it more effective, more efficient, functioning. So because states actually need data to say, oh, we have in these communities, this is what they need. So you just go to the system instead of start saying, oh, this community, what did they say they need again? Because it's not being recorded. But they just go to the system and say, oh, Koshofe local government, these are the things they need in order of priority. Also, let's pick the first two and just implement it in this quarter, right? So that if the regional development commissions can actually do that for them, ensure that the data are always up to date to make life easy for both states implementation and even federal government, because even federal government can also want to say that, oh, Lagos State, can you try to tilt your project towards this line, because they have actually looked at the data as well, right? So it's not just the states that will be dealing with this data. Even federal governments this data can be useful for the federal government as well. And also another thing that the RDCs can do is to try and mobilize and coordinate public private sector participation when it comes to human capital development, especially in our underserved areas, the rural communities where investment is extremely low. So they can actually help to mobilize private sectors that actually want to come and invest in the states to tilt their investment towards these rural areas. Because a lot of times you go to almost all states and it's the big cities that are actually, getting development, getting investment. You enter a state like Osun State. I'm from Osun State anyways. And you say that Oshogbo is, well developed, but you go to the small cities and investments or development rarely gets to them. So these are things that the regional development commissioners can actually also help. So anytime if a private sector wants to say, oh, I want to invest in this state, they can actually tell them that, oh, instead of going to the state capital, can we go to the smaller cities, so that people in that in those small cities can also experience some form of development? Because a lot of times our governments, both federal government and subnational government, do not pay attention to these small communities. I mean, you go to some communities and they don't have a primary school, they don't have a secondary school buildings, and their children need to trek miles to other communities before they can get basic education. I think every community you have at least a primary school, a secondary school, but till today, some communities in some states do not, have such. And a lot of times, because it's risky for their children to go miles before they can get this basic education, then they decide that, oh, they rather not go to school. So I think that's something else that the regional communities can do. They can also help strengthen capacity at the subnational levels, right? Many states do not have these technical capacities to actually implement large-scale projects, when it comes to market development. This is something that the RDCs can also provide for, help them. Capacity development, workshops, trainings at the state level. This will also help the states to, be able to implement some of these projects. Because at times you see some projects in some states and you'll be like, what are they doing? Because it's obvious that the people implementing it they don't have the technical knowledge of what they are doing. Right? So I think RDCs can help that. And also there is that we've always had the issue of duplication of project. Because you see maybe somebody is implementing this project, is in their budget, another person has the same project in their budget. So it's something that they can also up, or, come into to ensure that there's no duplication of efforts when it comes to project implementation. And that will actually improve efficiency. It's going to allow states to focus more on service delivery, because at the end of the day, the only way that citizens can gain from the government is through service delivery. Because over time, we've seen that it's not because the states are not really working, but maybe because what they are, prioritizing does not align with the states. Then citizens will say, "Oh, they are not working. My government is not working. My government is not working." Whereas they're actually doing a lot, but they need to come down to the citizens' level to ensure that whatever they're doing aligns with what citizens want. Basically, so I think those are the few things that the regional development commissions can actually do for us to ensure that human capital development is being prioritized at the subnational level.
Yeah. Now, let's look at the political cycle. It has already begun, and I know you're following the primaries, conventions, and plans of the various political parties ahead of the 2027 general elections. And of course, you know that several states will be up for a new governor. Some governors will go in for re-election. But are there areas that budget has identified as fiscal bottlenecks that subnationals must address to enable them attract investment and be viable for sustainable economic development? When you look at our national capital importation report, it always shows Lagos, Abuja, one or two states Ogun as the people that attract investment. The rest are not really attracting activities.
So, if you look at our state of states analysis over the years, not just last season, but we've done that for 10 years. Last year made it the 10th edition.
10 years, yes.
We've consistently, focused or pointed to structural weaknesses when it comes to revenue generation at the subnational level. We lay emphasis on expenditure efficiency. How well is the things that they're spending on, right? The projects, whatever they're spending their revenue on, how efficient, are these projects. Then we also always lay emphasis on debt sustainability. So when it comes to debt in these states, how sustainable are they? And also we oftentimes speak about governance frameworks that needs to be, looked into. This year is a very critical year for us. Any pre-election year is very critical, and we need to ensure that whatever the government at the state level, at the federal government level, whatever they're doing, we need to pay adequate attention to it, because like you said, campaigns are starting, they're doing convention here and there, primary elections, and they may not have that, they may not pay attention to the governance work that they're supposed to do this year, because the election is taking their priority, right? So I think one of the things that they need to look into is the bottlenecks around over-reliance on federal transfers. Because I know that the rate at which, we like in the last 4-5 years, some states were trying to, ensure that they almost meet up the federal transfers that they were getting. But in the last 2 years, especially due to the removal of subsidy, I don't think any state can meet whatever government is giving them when it comes to their IGR, right? But then again, they still, no matter how much they are getting from federal transfers, they still need to ensure that their IGR keeps increasing. And one of the ways that they can actually, reduce this over-dependence on federal transfers is to ensure that they broaden their tax base, right? They can, improve their tax administration. We have the new tax regime now, which is something that I feel like the states should actually really benefit. For me, I feel like the states should actually benefit more from this new tax administration than the federal government, if they actually ensure that they put things in place in the right order. They need to ensure that the informal sector in their states is actually, they put a structure to it as much as, they might not be able to put a structure to it 100%, but they need to ensure that as much as they can, they put a structure to it to ensure that whatever revenue is coming from the informal sector is actually getting to the government pockets. Yeah. This is one way that they can actually, increase the IGR. They need to ensure that they leverage technology when it comes to revenue collection. Yeah, and they need to ensure that they close all leakages as much as, to the barest minimum. 100% they cannot, to be honest, but at least as much as they can. This is one way that they can actually, ensure that their tax base is, it helps to improve their IGR at the end of the day. And another thing is also weak public financial management systems. This is something that is very common to almost all the subnationals, right? So our budget credibility in Nigeria remains a concern, both at the subnationals and at the federal government level. I feel like our budget is always over ambitious every year. They tell you, oh, this is our total expenditure, our budget. Then you are looking at the expenditure and you're looking at the revenue and you're like, the difference is too much. And then our deficit is always very huge. And at the end of the day, just to, borrowings and borrowings and borrowings. And to be honest with you, borrowing is not even an issue. There's nothing bad in taking loans. But what is the problem is that what are they using these loans for? That is where we have issues, because taking loan is not a problem, but what are the projects? What are the things that you are spending this loan on? Are they things that on the long run will bring in revenue back to the government that maybe they can even pay, if not all the loans, but part of the loans from these projects that you're actually spending the money on, right? So I think that's one of the issues of our debts, burden as well. So there's always these huge discrepancies between our budget and the actual implementation at the end of the day, the actual budget at the end of the day. So, and the truth is that for states, that a lot of states that they are, trying to attract investors into their states, these kind of discrepancies will actually undermine investors' confidence, because they feel like, we are not sure this state knows what they are doing, because I don't think I want to invest in this state if there's this huge discrepancies between the budgeted figure and the actual figure at the end of the day. So it's something that states needs to ensure that they are realistic as much as possible when it comes to their budgets, right? They also need to, their sustainability is really growing even in states beyond the federal government. And like I said, while taking loans is not a problem, borrowing is actually necessary for development. They cannot carry out development with only the revenue that they have, because by the time you look at the state's revenue at the end of the year, if they remove personnel costs, if they remove overhead costs, right, what remains for capital investment is always very minimal. So that's, of course, go down to loan, to go back and take loan. But then again, they need to ensure that before they take any loan, they need to have a clear management, debt management strategies. Like, how do we want to manage this loan? Because lack of having in these strategies actually leads to debt service, it keeps rising. That's actually crowd out productive spending, because you need to service your loan. Then little remains for you to spend on capex every year. So nationals needs to align their borrowing, their loans with high impact revenue generating projects. So like I said, the projects that they'll be spending their loans on should be able to pay parts, if not all of this loan back at the end of the day. So they need to be strategic when they are, saying, oh, these are the projects that we want to borrow loans for. So that's that thing. And I think finally I will talk about accountability and data transparency. Like I said earlier, we have weak data systems in the country generally. At the subnational level, especially, this do not allow them to be accountable to citizens. Anybody should be able to go to any state website and find all necessary data on it that they need for anything. But it's actually beyond, yes, we know that all states now upload their budgets, right? But beyond that, how many states upload their procurement processes? How many states upload their, this project, this is a contractor that is working on it? You barely see that. So I can see a road now in my area and say, oh, so this road, let me look at the name of the street and go to Lagos State portal. I should be able to locate the contractor that is in charge of that road. But you see that. Yes, you hardly see that. So even know that, okay, this is how much they are going to pay this contractor for this road. Then that you cannot determine that does it actually worth it, how much they want to pay and the kind of road that they are implementing, right? Yeah. So you don't see this, this data on the state's portal, and that's just simply says that states are not 100% accountable and transparent to their citizens.
we commend budgets and others who continue to track what's happening at subnationals and even down to local government, because it's very important. If you don't track, how do you assess? And as we enter another election cycle, how do we now engage to interrogate? And don't just note that your data will be used effectively alongside other data to interrogate all these leaders as they will be preparing for the next round of gubernatorial elections. So thank you very much, Adejoke Akinbode, Head of Research Budget, for this interesting conversation looking at subnationals investing in human capital development and sustainable economic development in our country. Thank you very much for the time.
It's a pleasure.
To our viewers, if you want to get further insights on this conversation, visit the ProShare website displayed on the screen and follow our social media platforms to engage. Till you come your way again, enrich yourself with the knowledge of socio-economic developments around you, because it's a wise thing to do. I'm Ottoabasi Abasiekong. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.